Hey guys, I want to talk to you about a study that came out the end of August. And I'm surprised I haven't talked about it since it came out, being that it's now October, but there was a huge study that was done, a global study, 18 countries, 135,000 participants in the study, in this dietary study, to show, to find out whether it's carbs or fats that make people sick and what the risk indicators are. The study is called PURE. I'm going to link to it at MedPage today, and you can find it. It was widely and broadly discussed in the media, mainstream media. But MedPage is a page for medical professionals, for people that are working in the health industry, and as a way of like continuing education. And so they give a good synopsis here of this study. If you are someone who follows research, if you're someone who even knows the scientific method, you know that a study with 135,000 participants in 18 countries that has a median, they checked up with these people for a median range of over 7 years. You know that that is a really unusually large study. Most studies, a lot of studies that make national news only have 100 participants. The most recent one that talked about alternate day fasting and its comparison with daily caloric restriction, which was a few months back, only had 100 participants in it. And so when you come out with a study that's this huge, it's worth paying attention to. It's worth taking a look at. But I just want to share with you a few little highlights from this study, because it really blows it, because I've been getting some vegan flack. And it really lets the air out of things like What the Health, the documentary that has, basically been roundly excoriated by the scientific community. But, I'm not pushing an agenda here, you guys. I talk about intermittent fasting on this channel, and I talk about the fact that whatever diet you choose, you can work with, you can incorporate that into your lifestyle. You can incorporate fasting in your lifestyle, but I really don't espouse or push. I'm not militant. I'm not like a disciple of keto or something like that. I try different things, and I say that you should do what works for you. And that's kind of like my general philosophy, is that you should do whatever works for you. So I don't have an agenda here. I just want to talk about the facts of the study, the things that it points out. Okay, so for example, the study was called PURE. If you want to look it up and delve deeper, Prospective Urban Rural Epidemiology. Okay? So, what did it find out? I talked about the method there for a second and how many people were involved. 18 countries. Here's what they found. Bottom line, defying expectations, PURE found that high carbohydrate intake was associated with a significant increase in the risk of death, while both total fat and saturated and unsaturated fats were associated with a decreased risk of death. Fat consumption was not associated with cardiovascular disease or cardiovascular mortality. This is big news, man. Big news. And they also found that high intake of carbohydrates had the most adverse impact on cardiovascular risk factors, while monounsaturated fats had a beneficial effect, which we know, and saturated fat had a neutral effect. So, basically, if you're eating more carbs, your cardiovascular risk factors go up with your increase in carbs. Reducing saturated fatty acids and replacing them with carbohydrates, which is what our government here in the United States of America has been pushing for the last 50 years, since I was a child. Reducing saturated fatty acids and replacing them with carbohydrates. That's government policy. That's what's in the schools. Thank you, Michelle Obama. This is what's happening in America. And it's not just her fault. I'm not picking on you, Michelle. But this policy has been very bad policy. And as it's been pushed, the obesity epidemic has just expanded and grown exponentially, so that now we have infants and young children that are obese. And so their current recommendations are to reduce total fat. No, that the current recommendations are to reduce total fat and saturated fatty acids in all populations, which de facto increases carbohydrate intake. And that's not supported by their data. So that was this big deal, you know. The other thing they found is that eating tons and tons of fruits and vegetables, I'm sorry some of y'all, did not exponentially help, did not help your health. And the study did confirm that fruits and veggies and legumes in moderation are good for you, but it did not show that the benefits keep growing with increased consumption. Maximum benefit was achieved with 3 to 4 servings per day. Current guidelines, ding, 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 recommend that people consume 5 servings a day. The authors note that many people in lower income countries are unable to afford this high level of consumption. And might I add, the article doesn't say this, but here in the United States, there are a lot of people who are woke to the fact that when you try to eat more vegetables, your increase of your budget, your food budget goes up. The vegetables are way more expensive. And so the news is that eating tons and tons of vegetables is not necessarily going to add more and more to your health. It's not going to lead to greater and greater health. This is what, over the course of average studying each person for 7 years in 18 countries, both poor and rich, both underdeveloped and overdeveloped, this is what they found. But many Americans cannot eat, you know, the recommended, or don't eat the recommended amount of vegetables. And I'm not saying, and neither is the study, that vegetables aren't important. It's just saying that, you know, going totally eating just vegetables is not necessarily going to lead to greater health. And so if you're like me and you look at, I love salad. I can eat a salad every day. But when someone comes along and says you can only eat salad, you can only eat the food that the barnyard animals eat, okay? That's what Ron Swanson would call the food that my food eats, you know? And they really don't have a leg to stand on when they say things like that. And they don't have history behind them, and they don't have science behind them when they say things like that. So you can kind of be free. Now, what this study is not, it's not an argument for keto. It's not an argument for a low-carb diet. You know, it's just to say, hey, when we're eating more and more carbs, it's really another nail in the coffin of the whole idea that, you know, what the government has pushed, this whole idea that fat is the enemy. It's the nails in the coffin of that. It's a global perspective, a global study, huge study, and fats are not the enemy, you guys. They're just not. Now, there are some fats, obviously, trans fats, you know, unnatural fats that come from corn and soy and things like that are obviously not good for us. Trans fats, things like that. But natural fat is not our enemy. Saturated fat is not our enemy. What is our enemy and continues to be a problem is sugar. Because when you take all the fat out of your food and you think fat is the enemy, you have to put carbs in the food for people to buy it. So the food companies have said on the Swedish Fish label, it says, a fat-free food. And if you think that makes it healthy, then you haven't been paying attention to what's going on. You know, you need to go to Walmart and look around and look at the average person. And look at me. Look at the fact that I've lived and I've tried to abide by these guidelines and thought fat was the enemy for most of my life because that's what I was told. And it just turns out not to be true. So I'm going to put a link to that study in the description. You can check it out and read it for yourself. Some of you have asked, and I have heard you. I have heard you. These shirts are now available on teespring.com. This was a prototype that I ordered just for my own pleasure and enjoyment, and just to be able to maybe spark some conversations with family and friends. But if you'd like to get a t-shirt or a mug, there's different sizes. I think there's t-shirts, hoodies, some women's shirts, and some different things that you can look here. Link in the description, teespring.com. And you can pick one up. And if you do, you'll be supporting the channel and the future of the channel, the content, the diversification of content. And so with that, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we fast. See you next time.